My parents skipped my wedding to attend the opening of my sister's third dog spa, a money pit they had sunk $2 million into. Standing at the altar, I vowed they would never hurt me again. 5 years later, when Forbes listed my net worth at $200 million, my mother finally called. She expects a check, but the only document I plan to sign for them is a foreclosure order. My name is Fiona Hartwood. I stared at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the bridal suite, smoothing the crepe silk of my gown for the 10th time in as many minutes. The dress was simple, an architectural column of white that Liam, with his architect's eye, had picked out because he said it made me look like a statue carved from moonlight. It was elegant. It was understated. It was everything my mother hated. Outside the panoramic windows, the Oregon coast was living up to its reputation. The sky was a bruised shade of violet and gray. The Pacific Ocean crashed against the black rocks with a violence that vibrated through the floorboards of the resort. It was beautiful, but it was a lonely kind of beauty. I picked up my phone from the vanity table. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling just enough to be noticeable. It was 2 p.m. The ceremony was scheduled to start in 30 minutes. There were 42 notifications. Congratulations from college friends, emails from my team at the lab, who apparently did not understand the concept of a day off, and a reminder from my calendar, but there was nothing from the 3 people who shared my DNA. No "good luck, sweetie," no "we are so sorry we aren't there," nothing. I sat down on the velvet ottoman, the silk of my dress pooling around me like a puddle of milk, and allowed myself to replay the conversation from 3 days ago. It was a form of self-torture I needed to endure one last time to cauterize the wound. "Fiona, be reasonable," my mother's voice had chirped through the receiver, sounding tinny and distracted. I could hear the high-pitched yapping of Bianca's Pomeranians in the background. "You know how sensitive your sister is. This opening is pivotal for her. Paws and Glamour isn't just a dog spa, it is a lifestyle brand." "I am getting married, Mom," I had said, my voice sounding far younger and smaller than a 27-year-old woman's voice should. "It is my wedding. I told you the date a year ago." I know," she sighed, the sound of a woman burdened by the weight of her own martyrdom. "But you are strong, Fiona. You always have been. You have Liam, and you have your career. Bianca needs us. If we aren't there to cut the ribbon, she will spiral. You do not want your sister to spiral on your wedding weekend, do you? That would be selfish." Selfish. The word hung in the air of the bridal suite, heavy and suffocating. I stood up, shaking off the memory. I was not going to cry. I had paid a makeup artist $500 to make me look flawless. I was not going to ruin her work over people who viewed my existence as a convenient backup plan. A knock came at the door. It was the coordinator, a kind woman named Sarah, who had spent the last hour giving me pitying looks she thought I did not catch. "It is time, Ms. Hartwood," she said softly. I walked out into the biting coastal wind. The ceremony was set up on a cliff overlooking the churning water. It was a breathtaking scene. We had invited 150 guests. They were my colleagues from the biotech world, Liam's friends from the architecture firm, and our shared circle of survivors from university. It was a sea of supportive, intelligent faces, people who respected me for my mind and my work. But as I turned the corner to start my walk down the aisle, my vision tunneled. I did not see the white roses lining the path. I did not see the gray sky. I saw only the front row on the bride's side. 2 wooden chairs sat there, perfectly positioned for the best view of the vows. They were empty. Attached to the back of each chair was a piece of heavy cardstock with elegant calligraphy. Richard, Catherine. I had left the tags there. Part of me had hoped, with a pathetic, childlike desperation, that they would surprise me, that a helicopter would land, or a car would screech into the driveway at the last second, just like in the movies. But this was not a movie. This was the cold reality of the Hartwood family dynamic. The wind whipped at the empty chairs, making the name tags flutter like flags of surrender. A murmur went through the crowd as I walked past the back rows. They were trying to be polite, but I could feel their eyes darting from me to the empty seats. The humiliation burned under my skin, hotter than the shame of rejection. It was a public declaration of my worthlessness in the eyes of the people who were supposed to love me most. My breath hitched. My steps faltered. Then I looked up. Standing under the driftwood arch was Liam. The wind was messing up his hair, and his hands were clasped tightly in front of him. He wasn't looking at the empty chairs. He was looking at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of awe and fierce protectiveness. He saw the panic rising in my chest, and he did the one thing that could bring me back. He stepped off the altar, breaking protocol, and walked toward me. He met me halfway down the aisle. He didn't say a word. He just took my ice-cold hand in his warm one and squeezed. It was a grounding force, an anchor dropping through the storm of my emotions. In that squeeze, he said everything my parents never could. I am here. I chose you. You are not alone. We walked the rest of the way together. When we reached the front, I forced myself to look at those empty chairs one last time. I stared at the names Richard and Catherine until the letters blurred. And then, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a break. It was a release. For years, I had been chasing their approval, earning degrees, getting promotions, trying to be the perfect daughter so they would look at me the way they looked at Bianca. But as the officiant began to speak about love and commitment, I realized that the chase was over. They had made their choice. They chose a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a dog spa over their daughter's vows. I turned my back on the empty chairs and looked up at Liam. I do, I said, and my voice was stronger than the wind. I absolutely do. I wasn't just vowing to love him. I was vowing to love myself enough to stop begging for scraps. I was burying the daughter I used to be right there on the Oregon cliffs. The reception was a blur of warmth, wine, and laughter. For hours, I managed to forget. I danced with Liam. I drank champagne with my research partners. And I ate the cake that cost more than my first car. But as the night wound down and I went to the cloakroom to retrieve my wrap, the habit kicked in. I pulled out my phone. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. There was a notification from Instagram, a tag. My stomach dropped, but my fingers moved on their own. Opening the app, it was a photo posted by Bianca. The image was bright, saturated with filters. It showed the front of Pause and Glamour, decorated with pink and gold balloons. In the center of the frame stood my sister, holding a giant pair of ceremonial scissors, and flanking her, beaming with smiles I hadn't seen directed at me in a decade, were Richard and Catherine. My father had his arm around Bianca's shoulder. My mother was holding a glass of champagne, looking radiant. The timestamp showed it was posted 3 hours ago, exactly when I was saying my vows. I read the caption. So proud of my baby girl, another empire built. Nothing matters more than being together to celebrate these big moments. Family is number one. Pause and glamour. Family first, blessed family is number one. The irony tasted like bile in my throat. They weren't just absent. They were broadcasting their preference to the world. They were erasing me in real time. I looked at the picture one last time. I looked at my father's proud grin, my mother's adoring gaze. They looked so happy. They didn't look like they missed me at all. I didn't cry. The tears I had held back at the altar had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Family is number one, I whispered to the empty cloakroom. You are right, Bianca, and you are no longer mine. My thumb hovered over the username, Catherine Hartwood. I hit block. I moved to Richard Hartwood Official, block, and finally, Queen Bianca, block. The screen refreshed, and their faces vanished. The profiles were gone. I put the phone in my purse, snapped the clasp shut, and walked back out to the party. My husband was waiting for me. My real life was waiting for me. And as for the Hartwoods, they were about to find out that when you cut someone out of a picture, you don't get to ask for a copy of the negative later. 5 years is a long time in the world of biotechnology. In that span, cells die and regenerate. Entire ecosystems shift. And the girl who stood crying in a wedding dress on the Oregon coast can harden into something unrecognizable. I was no longer the Fiona who begged for scraps of affection. I was the CEO of Novus Bio. The last 60 months had been a blur of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled desperate sprints toward deadlines. I had traded my tears for business plans and my naivety for patent law. There were nights when I fell asleep on the office floor, wrapped in a trench coat, with Liam bringing me takeout at 3 a.m. just to make sure I ate something other than ambition. He never complained. He understood that Novus Bio was not just a company, it was my fortress. It was the one thing I built that nobody gave me, and therefore, nobody could take away. We were developing a breakthrough in rapid cellular regeneration. It was risky science, the kind that makes investors nervous. But I pushed. I pushed my team, and I pushed myself until we cracked the code. That morning, the gamble paid off. I sat at the head of a mahogany table that was longer than my first apartment. Across from me sat the representatives of Ether Zenith, one of the largest pharmaceutical conglomerates in the world. The air in the room was stale, recycled, and thick with tension. My lawyer, a shark named Marcus, who smiled only when blood was in the water, slid the final contract toward me. I looked at the number on the bottom line. It was not just a number, it was vindication. $200 million. That was the valuation of my personal stake in the acquisition. I signed my name, Fiona Hartwood, with a steady hand. The pen did not shake. The ink dried instantly, sealing my fate as the new queen of biotech in Seattle. The celebration that followed was not champagne and caviar. That was not our style. An hour later, my team and I were in the main lab, surrounded by millions of dollars of equipment, eating pepperoni pizza from greasy cardboard boxes and drinking craft beer from plastic cups. Liam was there, his arm draped over the back of my chair, beaming at me with that same look he had given me at the altar. "To the Queen," he toasted, raising his plastic cup. "To science," I corrected him, clinking my cup against his, "and to never ask anyone for permission again." While I was laughing with my lead researcher about a coding error that nearly cost us the Phase 2 trials, I had no idea that 30 miles south, a very different scene was playing out. I only learned the details later, pieced together from investigations and the pathetic trail of digital footprints my family left behind. But in my mind, the scene is as clear as if I had been a fly on their peeling wallpaper. The Hartwood Manor, once the envy of the neighborhood, was rotting from the inside out. The landscaping crew had been fired 2 years ago, so the hedges were overgrown, clawing at the windows like desperate fingers. Inside, the heating was kept low to save money, casting a damp chill over the fading luxury. Richard and Catherine were in the kitchen. My father was staring at a stack of envelopes on the granite island as if they were venomous snakes. They were final notices, the water bill, the electricity, the property tax lien. "You said the investment in Bianca's boutique would pay off by Christmas," my father muttered, rubbing his temples. "Catherine, we are 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank is calling me at work. It is humiliating." "Don't blame Bianca," my mother snapped, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. She was wearing a silk robe that had seen better days, sipping wine that came from a box, not a vintage bottle. "The market is just slow. She's an artist. Richard, she needs time." "She needs a job," my father retorted. "And we need a miracle." In the living room, Bianca was sprawled on the couch, surrounded by the remnants of her latest failed hobby. She was scrolling through her iPad, her face illuminated by the blue light, looking for someone to blame for her boredom. She navigated to the business section of the news, likely looking for trends to copy for her next ill-advised venture. Then she screamed. It was not a scream of fear. It was the sharp, piercing shriek of envy. "Mom! Dad! You have to see this!" My parents rushed into the living room, expecting an accident. Instead, Bianca shoved the iPad into my father's face. The homepage of the Financial Times featured a large, high-definition portrait of me. I was wearing a black turtleneck, arms crossed, looking directly into the camera lens with eyes that held zero warmth. The headline read, "The $200 million Woman." How Fiona Hartwood Revolutionized Regenerative Medicine. My father froze. He did not read the article. He only saw the number, 200 million. Is this real? He whispered, his voice trembling. Fiona, our Fiona. $200 million. My mother breathed out, the wineglass in her hand tilted dangerously. The anger and stress that had been etching lines into her face moments ago vanished, replaced by a terrifying, predatory hunger. Bianca snatched the iPad back, her eyes scanning the text. She sold her company. She is liquid. Mom, she has cash. $200 million. Do you know how many spas I could open with just 1% of that? The silence that followed in that damp, cold living room was heavy with calculation. They looked at each other, and the shared realization hit them like a drug. They were not looking at a daughter or a sister who had achieved greatness. They were looking at a lottery ticket they had forgotten to cash. She is family, my mother said softly, a twisted smile spreading across her face. Family helps family. We just lost touch. That is all. She is probably lonely at the top. She needs her mother. She blocked us. Catherine, my father reminded her, though he was already straightening his posture, the defeat leaving his shoulders. Blocks can be removed, Bianca said, her thumbs already flying across her phone screen, searching for my new contact information. She can't ignore a crisis. No one ignores a crisis. Back in the Novus Biolab, the laughter was dying down. The pizza boxes were empty. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had won. I had built a life so large that the shadow of my past couldn't touch me. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, who guarded my time like a pit bull, walked into the lab. She looked uneasy. She held a portable phone handset against her chest, covering the microphone. Fiona, she said, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of the refrigerators. I am so sorry to interrupt. I told them you were in a meeting, but the woman on the line is hysterical. She says it is a medical emergency. I felt the temperature in the room drop. Liam stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. Who is it? I asked, though deep in my gut. The old dread began to coil like a waking snake. Sarah looked at the phone, then back at me. It is Catherine Hartwood. She says she is your mother. She says your father is collapsing. She says... Sarah hesitated, flinching at the volume coming from the receiver. She says his heart is giving out, and you are the only one who can save him. I stared at the phone. 5 years of silence. Broken the same day my bank account hit 9 figures. The timing was too precise to be a coincidence. It was surgical. I stood up, brushing the crumbs from my jeans. The CEO was back. Give me the phone, I said. I accepted the phone from Sarah. My hands steady, but my knuckles white. I pressed the speaker button and placed the device on the stainless steel lab bench, right next to a centrifuge that was worth more than my parents' entire house. Liam leaned in, his jaw set in a hard line, listening. Fiona, is that you, darling? The voice that floated out of the speaker was not the dismissive, hurried tone I remembered from the week of my wedding. It was coated in a layer of saccharine warmth so thick it could have choked a diabetic. It was a performance, a voice designed for an audience, though my mother had no idea she was currently being broadcast to my husband and my assistant. I am here, Catherine, I said, refusing to use the word mom. Sarah said it was a medical emergency. What is wrong with Richard? There was a dramatic, shuddering breath on the other end. Oh, Fiona. It is your father. We saw the news, the Financial Times. We were just so overcome. He was so proud, so incredibly moved by your success that his blood pressure spiked. He is lying on the sofa right now, clutching his chest. He just kept saying your name. I looked at Liam. He rolled his eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. The image of Richard Hartwood, a man whose only known passion was his golf handicap, clutching his chest in pride over the daughter he had ignored for a decade, was laughable. If he is clutching his chest and his blood pressure is critical, I said, my voice cutting through her theatrics like a scalpel. "Then you need to hang up immediately and dial 911. I am a biotech CEO. Catherine, not a cardiologist. I cannot defibrillate him through the phone." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence where the emergency evaporated into thin air. If he were truly dying, she would have been screaming. Instead, I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head as she realized her opening gambit had failed. "Well," she stammered, the frailty vanishing from her tone. "He is stabilizing. It was just a shock of joy. We have missed you so much. Fiona, we were sitting here, just talking about how foolish we have been to let work and life get in the way of family. We want to see you. We want to celebrate with you." "Celebrate me," I repeated flatly, "like you celebrated Bianca's ribbon cutting." "That is in the past," she cried out, almost too quickly. "We want to make it right. Come to dinner this Sunday. Just us. Family. Your father, me, Bianca, and you. Please, Fiona, don't let your father's health suffer because of a grudge." I was about to tell her exactly where she could shove her dinner invitation when Liam touched my arm. He muted the call. "You should go," he whispered. I looked at him as if he had grown a second head. "Are you insane?" "You heard her. It is a trap." "Of course it is a trap," Liam agreed, his eyes dark. "But if you don't go, if you don't face them down and close this chapter explicitly, they will haunt you. They will show up at the office. They will talk to the press. They will play the victim card forever. Go there. Look them in the eye. Let them see what they threw away. And then cut the cord yourself. Don't let it fade out. Serve it." He was right. Ghosting them was passive. I needed to be active. I unmuted the phone. "Sunday at 7, I said. "And Catherine, if you serve that cheap boxed wine, I am leaving." I hung up before she could answer, but I was not going into the lion's den without a weapon. I spent the next 48 hours doing what I did best: research. I called a private investigation firm that Novus Bio used for corporate background checks. I told them I wanted a full financial autopsy on Richard, Catherine, and Bianca Hartwood. The report landed on my encrypted server Friday afternoon. It was not just enlightening, it was a comedy of errors. My parents were not just poor, they were destitute. They were drowning in a sea of bad decisions. The dossier revealed that Richard had refinanced their home 3 times in the last 5 years. They were upside down on the mortgage, owing more than the rotting manor was worth. Their credit cards were maxed out on appearances, country club memberships they could not afford, and leased luxury cars to keep up the charade of wealth. Mais la pièce de résistance était Bianca. The golden child had been busy. The report detailed the spectacular implosion of Pause and Glamour. My parents had liquidated their retirement accounts to fund that spa, pouring nearly $2 million into a renovation that included gold leaf bathtubs for poodles. It had closed in 6 months. The reason was not just bad business. It was negligence. Bianca had been hit with 3 separate lawsuits. Apparently, in her quest for aesthetic perfection, she had insisted on using a proprietary fur dye that turned out to be toxic. Several prize-winning show dogs had lost their fur, and one had nearly died. The legal settlements had wiped out whatever cash my parents had left. They were not calling because they missed me. They were calling because I was the only person on earth with a checkbook big enough to pull them out of the quicksand. Sunday arrived with a gray, drizzly sky. Typical for Seattle. I stood in my garage, staring at my reflection in the window of my car. I was wearing a tailored crimson suit that cost more than my father's car. My hair was sharp, angular, and perfect. Liam leaned against the doorframe. "Which one are you taking?" he asked. I looked at the sensible Audi sedan I used for commuting. Then I looked at the beast sleeping under a custom cover next to it. "The Audi is for Fiona the scientist," I said. "Tonight, I am sending a different message." I walked over and pulled the cover off the McLaren P1. It was a hybrid sports car, a masterpiece of engineering in volcano orange. It was aggressive, loud, and unapologetically expensive. It was a car that screamed power. It was a car that said I did not just survive my family's neglect. I thrived in spite of it. Subtle, Liam smirked. I am done being subtle, I replied. Opening the butterfly door, it swung up like a wing. I slid into the low seat, the smell of premium leather filling my senses. I pressed the start button, and the engine roared to life behind my head, a deep, guttural growl that shook the concrete floor. Good luck, Liam shouted over the engine noise. Don't sign anything. I intend to sign exactly one thing, I muttered to myself as I reversed out of the garage. I drove toward the suburbs, the McLaren cutting through the rain like a hot knife. The drive to my childhood home usually took 40 minutes, but with 900 horsepower at my disposal, the world blurred past me. As I turned onto the familiar street, lined with oak trees and fading dreams, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I knew their secrets. I knew their desperation. They thought they were inviting a sheep to the slaughter, hoping to shear me for my wool. They had no idea they had just invited the wolf inside. I pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the Heartwood estate. The metal was rusting, and the electronic keypad was broken, hanging by a wire. I didn't bother buzzing. I just revved the engine, the sound echoing off their peeling facade like a war cry. The front door opened instantly. I saw 3 figures standing there, huddled together against the cold. I shifted into the park and took a deep breath. It was time to show them exactly what $200 million looked like in the flesh. The engine of the McLaren P1 died with a suddenness that left my ears ringing. For a moment, I just sat there in the cockpit, gripping the leather steering wheel, looking out at the house that had built my insecurities brick by brick. Under the gray twilight of the Pacific Northwest, the Heartwood estate looked like a dying animal. The grass, once manicured to within an inch of its life by a team of gardeners, was now ankle-high and patchy, choked with weeds that clawed at the ornamental statues. The paint on the wraparound porch was peeling in long, sickly strips, revealing the gray wood beneath like exposed bone. It was a physical manifestation of the financial rot I knew was eating them alive from the inside. I pushed the door up and stepped out. The damp air smelled of rain and pine, a scent that usually brought me peace, but now only triggered a phantom ache in my chest. Before I could even lock the car, the front door swung open. Fiona, my father, Richard Heartwood, came down the steps with a speed I had not seen him exhibit in 20 years. He was wearing his best suit, a Navy Brooks Brothers number that I recognized from my high school graduation, but it hung loosely on his frame now. He looked older, his face gaunt, his eyes darting nervously toward the glowing orange supercar behind me before settling on my face. He threw his arms around me. I stiffened. I stood there like a statue, my arms at my sides, refusing to return the embrace. I remembered the day I was accepted into the doctoral program, bursting with pride, and he hadn't even looked up from his newspaper. Now, because Forbes had put a price tag on my head, I was suddenly worth hugging. "Look at you," he said, pulling back but keeping his hands on my shoulders, his grip clammy. "You look expensive. It is a crimson bespoke suit." "Dad," I said, my voice flat. "It costs more than your first car." "And the car," Bianca chimed in, appearing in the doorway. She was wearing a cocktail dress that was too tight and too sparkly for a family dinner, clearly trying to project an image of youthful success that no longer existed. Her eyes were not on me. They were devouring the McLaren. "Is that a P1? I saw one of these on a music video last week. Do you have any idea how many likes I could get if I posed on the hood?" "Touch the hood, Bianca, and you will lose a hand," I said, walking past her into the house. The interior was worse than the exterior. The foyer smelled of dust and stale potpourri. I noticed a water stain blooming across the ceiling fresco like a bruise, and the grand Persian rug was threadbare in the center. They were living in a mausoleum of their former glory. "Dinner is ready," my mother, Catherine, announced from the dining room. She emerged wiping her hands on a silk napkin, her smile tight and stretched thin over her anxiety. "We made your favorite, beef Wellington." I almost laughed. My favorite food was Thai curry. Beef Wellington was Bianca's favorite. They didn't even know who I was. We sat at the long mahogany dining table, the four of us separated by acres of polished wood and decades of resentment. The china was their wedding set, the crystal was Waterford, and the wine being poured was a vintage Cabernet that I knew retailed for $300 a bottle. I wondered which credit card had been sacrificed to put this meal on the table. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation was a painful dance of avoidance. My father talked about the weather. My mother complimented my hair. I cut into the beef, which was overcooked, and chewed mechanically. Then, inevitably, the pivot happened. "So," Bianca started, swirling her wineglass and looking at me with widened, innocent eyes. "I read the article. $200 million. That is insane. Seriously." "It is a valuation, Bianca," I corrected. "It represents hard work, intellectual property, and 5 years of not sleeping." Right, hard work." She waved her hand dismissively, as if hard work was a disease she was immune to. "But it means you have capital. That is the hardest part. You know capital. I have been so unlucky lately. The spa. Well, you know how people are. They just don't appreciate high-end vision in this economy. I was ahead of my time." I took a sip of water. "I heard you were sued for chemical burns on 3 poodles." The table went deadly silent. Bianca's face flushed a violent shade of red. My mother gasped, dropping her fork. "That was a misunderstanding," Bianca shrilled, her voice cracking. "The suppliers lied to me. I was the victim. I have this new idea. Fee. It is a subscription box for luxury pet supplements. It is $1 million idea. I just need a runway, a small injection of seed money." "See," my mother interrupted, leaning forward, her eyes pleading. "Your sister has the vision. Fiona, she just needs a little support. You are so successful now. You have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. Family is supposed to lift each other up. When one of us wins, we all win." I placed my knife and fork down on the china plate with a deliberate click. The sound echoed in the cavernous room. "When one of us wins, we all win," I repeated slowly, tasting the words. "That is a lovely sentiment, Mother." I looked at Richard, then at Catherine, and finally locked eyes with Bianca. "So tell me," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that forced them to lean in. 5 years ago, on the 3rd of June, Oregon coast, where were you?" The air was sucked out of the room. My mother blinked rapidly. My father stared at his wineglass as if hoping to drown in it. "Fiona, darling," my mother stammered. "We discussed this. It was a difficult time." "It was my wedding day," I said. "I stood there in front of 150 people. I looked at the front row. Do you know what I saw? I saw 2 empty wooden chairs. I saw my husband holding my hand because he was the only family I had. Where were you?" "I was having a crisis," Bianca burst out, slamming her hand on the table. My anxiety was through the roof. The opening of the spa was stressful. Mom and Dad had to be there to support me. You were always the strong one. Fiona, you didn't need them holding your hand. I did. "She is right," my father muttered, finally looking up. His eyes were not apologetic. They were defensive. "Bianca needed us more that weekend. You were getting married to that architect. You were fine. We knew you would be fine. Why are you bringing up ancient history? We are here now." "We are here now," I echoed. "Yes, we are." I looked at them. They truly believed it. They believed that my strength was a penalty, and Bianca's incompetence was a virtue that required constant tribute. They didn't see a daughter. They saw a resource. They didn't see a sister. They saw a bank. My father cleared his throat. Sensing that the emotional appeal was failing, he decided to switch tactics to what he thought was a business transaction. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick leather folder. He slid it across the polished wood. It stopped just inches from my untouched wineglass. "Look," Richard said, his voice taking on a forced, professional cadence. "Let's put the past in the past. We are in a bit of a tight spot. Fiona, Temporary liquidity issues. I have drawn up a plan, a restructuring of the Hartwood family assets. I didn't open the folder. What is in here, Richard? It is a proposal, he said, straightening his tie. We need an investment to save the house, to clear up some outstanding debts from the spa, and to seed Bianca's new venture so she can contribute to the family legacy. How much? I asked. He hesitated. He looked at Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. $5 million, he said. $5 million? I repeated. It is a loan, he added quickly, or an investment. We can work out the equity, but we need it by the end of the month. Otherwise, well, the bank is being unreasonable about the mortgage. I looked at the folder. Inside that leather casing lay the audacity of a lifetime. They wanted $5 million to fix the mistakes I had nothing to do with, to save a house I was never welcome in, and to fund a sister who had never worked a day in her life. $5 million, I said again, letting a small, cold smile play on my lips. You want me to write a check for $5 million to save this family? It is pocket change to you, Bianca muttered petulantly. It is, I agreed. It is exactly 2.5% of my net worth. I reached out and placed my hand on the folder. They all leaned forward, their eyes hungry, thinking they had won, thinking that the guilt, the pressure, and the bloodline had done its job. I will take this, I said, standing up. I will have my team look at the numbers. Really? My mother clasped her hands together, tears of relief springing to her eyes. Oh, Fiona, I knew it. I knew you loved us. I will look at the numbers, I said, walking toward the door, and I will give you my answer very soon. I didn't tell them that I didn't need to look at the numbers. I didn't tell them that I already owned the numbers. I walked out into the cold night, the folder tucked under my arm, leaving them celebrating a victory that was actually their execution order. The drive back to my penthouse was a blur of rain-slicked asphalt and streetlights that smeared across the windshield like streaks of oil. The leather folder my father had given me sat on the passenger seat of the McLaren. It looked innocent enough, just cowhide and paper, but I could feel it radiating a toxic energy, like a container of radioactive waste. I did not go to sleep when I got home. Instead, I called Marcus. Marcus was not just my general counsel. He was a forensic accountant with the instincts of a bloodhound and the moral flexibility of a mercenary. I paid him an obscene retainer to ensure that nothing in my life, personal or professional, could ever ambush me. It is midnight, Fiona, Marcus said when he walked into my study, not looking the least bit tired. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and carrying a tablet. I need an autopsy, I said, pointing to the folder on the mahogany desk. My father calls it a restructuring plan. I want to know what it really is. Marcus sat down, opened the folder, and began to scan the documents. For an hour, the only sound in the room was the hum of the air filtration system and the rhythmic tapping of Marcus's stylus against his screen. I stood by the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline, watching the city breathe while my family's secrets were dissected behind me. Fiona, Marcus said. His voice had changed. The cynical, professional detachment was gone, replaced by a note of genuine hesitation. I turned around. How bad is it? Are they bankrupt? They are beyond bankrupt, Marcus said, sliding the tablet toward me. But that is not what you need to see. While I was cross-referencing their listed liabilities with historical credit data to verify their claims, I found a flag, a suppressed record from 10 years ago. I frowned. 10 years ago, I was in college. I had nothing to do with them. Exactly, Marcus said grimly. Look at this. He pulled up a digital scan of a loan application. The date was from 6 years ago, just 2 months after my 26th birthday. It was a high-risk, high-interest auto loan for a luxury convertible. The principal amount was $75,000. I stared at the applicant's name, Fiona Hartwood, and then I stared at the signature. It was a loop-filled, shaky scrawl that attempted to mimic my handwriting but failed miserably. It looked exactly like the way my mother signed birthday cards. They used my name, I whispered, the air leaving my lungs. I was 18. I was eating instant noodles and working double shifts at the library to pay for textbooks, and they used my fresh, clean credit history to buy a car. For Bianca, Marcus clarified. Swiping to the next image, it was a registration document. The co-signer was Catherine Hartwood, but the primary liability holder was me. The vehicle was listed as a gift for Bianca's 16th birthday. I felt a wave of nausea so violent I had to grip the edge of the desk. I remembered that car. Bianca had driven it to school every day, flaunting it. While I took the bus, I had assumed my parents bought it. I never knew they had bought it with my future as the collateral. They defaulted on 3 payments a year later, Marcus continued, his voice low. It went to collections. They eventually paid it off using a second mortgage on the house, which is why you never got a court summons. But Fiona, this hit on your credit score. This is why you were rejected for that student housing loan in your junior year. Do you remember? I closed my eyes. I remembered it vividly. I had cried for 3 days because I couldn't understand why the bank saw me as a risk. I had been forced to live in a moldy basement apartment because of a clerical error on my credit report. It wasn't an error, it was theft. They didn't just neglect me, I said, my voice trembling with a cold, hard rage. They cannibalized me. They treated me like a spare battery to be drained whenever Bianca needed a light. It gets worse, Marcus said. I looked into the current status of the house. Richard told you they owe the bank. That is true. But they also have a second lien on the property, a home equity line of credit. No, Marcus shook his head. This is not a bank. It is a private lending firm called Shadow Capital. They specialize in distressed assets and high-risk borrowers who have been blacklisted by traditional institutions. The interest rate is predatory, 40%. I looked at the numbers. My parents had borrowed $200,000 from what was essentially a legalized loan shark to cover the lawsuits from Bianca's dog spa disaster. If they miss one more payment, Marcus explained, Shadow Capital has the right to foreclose immediately. They don't want the money. Fiona, they want the land. The estate sits on prime development soil. I sank into my leather chair. The picture was complete. They weren't just asking for $5 million to get back on their feet. They were asking me to unknowingly pay off a criminal interest rate and erase the evidence of their lifelong mismanagement. They looked at me and didn't see a daughter. They saw a get-out-of-jail-free card. The sadness I had felt at the dinner table evaporated. The little girl inside me who just wanted her parents to love her died in that chair. In her place sat the CEO of Novus Bio. I looked at the loan document again, the forgery of my 18-year-old signature. That was a felony. I could send them to prison. I could destroy them with a single phone call to the district attorney. But prison was too easy. The prison had free room and board. I wanted them to understand the weight of the world they had forced me to carry alone. I looked up at Marcus. My face was calm, stripped of all emotion. Marcus, I said, who owns the debt at Shadow Capital? Is it purchasable? Marcus blinked, surprised by the pivot. He tapped on his screen for a moment. These firms operate on liquidity. They will sell any note for the right price. If you offer them the principal plus 10%, they will hand over the deed within the hour. Do it, I commanded. You want to pay off their debt? Marcus asked, confused. Fiona, after what they did, I am not paying it off, I interrupted, leaning forward, my eyes locking onto him. I am buying it. I don't want to be their savior. Marcus, I want to be their creditor. I stood up and walked back to the window. The rain was still falling, washing the city clean. Contact Shadow Capital first thing in the morning, I instructed. Use a shell company so my parents don't see my name. Buy the mortgage note and the secondary lien. I want to own every single brick of that house. I want to own the roof over their heads and the ground under their feet. And once we own it, Marcus asked quietly, then we wait, I said. We wait for them to miss the next payment, which, given their spending habits, will be in exactly 3 days. I touched the cold glass of the window. They used my name to buy a car, I whispered to the reflection of the city. Now I am going to use my name to take their house. The conference room at Novus Bio was designed to intimidate. It was a glass box suspended 40 floors above the Seattle skyline, offering a view that made the cars below look like beetles and the pedestrians like ants. I sat at the head of the obsidian table, my back to the view, waiting. When my assistant, Sarah, ushered the Hartwood clan in, the dynamic was immediately apparent. They walked in not with the humility of beggars, but with the swagger of lottery winners who had merely misplaced their ticket for a few years. My father, Richard, smoothed his tie, looking around the room with a critical eye, assessing the cost of the furniture. My mother, Catherine, offered a tight, benevolent smile to Sarah, as if she were the lady of the manor greeting a scullery maid. And Bianca. Bianca looked like she was already spending money she didn't have. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the 3 chairs I had positioned on the opposite side of the table. "This is quite the setup. Fiona," my father said, settling into the leather chair. "A bit sterile for my taste, but I suppose it projects authority." "It projects solvency," I replied smoothly. "Something we need to discuss." I placed my hands on the table, clasping them over the empty space where their restructuring proposal should have been. I had shredded it an hour ago. "I have reviewed your request for $5 million, I began. The room went silent. I could hear Bianca's breathing hitch. My mother leaned forward, her eyes wide and wet, ready to summon tears of gratitude on command. "And," Bianca pressed, unable to help herself, "and I have decided that $5 million is a small number," I said. My father blinked. "Small. It is a bandage," I explained, leaning back and adopting the persona of the visionary CEO they read about in magazines. "You are asking for a bailout. A bailout implies failure. It implies you are drowning. If I just write you a check, the world will know you came to me for charity. Is that what you want? To be known as the poor relations of Fiona Hartwood?" I saw the sting hit my father's ego. I knew exactly where to aim. "No," Richard muttered, straightening his spine. "Of course not. We have our dignity." "Exactly," I said. "So, we are not going to do a bailout. We are going to do a partnership, a relaunch." I stood up and walked over to the whiteboard. I didn't write anything. I just stood there, commanding their attention. "I want to help you in a sustainable way." I lied. The words tasted like ash, but I delivered them with the conviction of a preacher. "I am going to establish a new financial entity. Let's call it the Hartwood Family Fund. I will seed it with the $5 million you asked for, plus additional capital for future projects." Bianca let out a squeal that sounded like a tire screech. "Additional capital. Like, for my business. For all legitimate family endeavors," I said, catching her eye. "But we cannot just do this quietly. If we do this in the shadows, the rumors about your financial trouble will persist. We need to kill the rumors. We need to show Seattle that the Hartwood family is not just surviving, but thriving." "What are you proposing?" my mother asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. "A gala," I declared. "A black tie event. Here, at the finest hotel in the city, I will cover the costs. We will invite everyone, your old business partners, the country club members who snubbed you, the creditors, the press. We will announce the fund and the unification of our family on stage. We will show them that the Hartwood legacy is untouchable." I watched the hook sink in. It was deep. It bypassed their logic and went straight to their vanity. They didn't hear trap. They heard redemption. They heard fame. "A gala," my mother whispered, her eyes glazing over as she undoubtedly imagined herself in a designer gown, holding court. "Oh, Fiona, that is magnificent. A public declaration." "It is the only way," I said. "But you have to sell it. You have to invite these people personally. Tell them you are back. Tell them your daughter, the CEO, is backing you 100%. "We can do that," Richard said, puffing out his chest. "I will make the calls today. I will tell the club board members they better dust off their tuxedos." "Good," I smiled. It was a shark's smile, but they were too busy counting their chickens to notice the teeth. The event is this Saturday. You have 4 days to prepare. Make sure you look the part. I want you to shine. They left the office floating on a cloud of delusion. Bianca actually tried to hug me on the way out, but I deftly sidestepped behind my chair, pretending to reach for a file. "See you Saturday, sis," she chirped. "I need to go shopping." As soon as the heavy glass doors clicked shut, my smile vanished. I pressed the intercom button. "Sarah, send in the update from the private investigator." For the next 4 days, I didn't just work. I watched. It was a fascinating, morbid study in human greed. The reports from my private investigator came in hourly, painting a picture of a family spiraling into madness. Emboldened by my promise of the family fund, my parents and sister went on a spending spree that was clinically insane. They didn't have the money yet, but that didn't stop them. My father went to a luxury car dealership and leased a Bentley Flying Spur for the weekend, using the promise of the incoming wire transfer to bully the salesman into waiving the deposit check hold. He wanted to arrive at the gala in a car that screamed old money. My mother spent 6 hours at a high-end jewelry boutique. She didn't buy anything, her credit was too short, but she convinced the manager, an old acquaintance she hadn't spoken to in years, to loan her a diamond necklace worth $80,000 for the night, promising that I would be coming in next week to buy it for her. She was leveraging my name to adorn her neck, and Bianca. Bianca was the worst. I watched the security footage from a boutique downtown, hacked by my security team. She was trying on a dress that cost $12,000. It was a gold-sequined monstrosity that looked like a disco ball had exploded. She was on the phone, her voice loud enough to be picked up by the store's security microphone. "Yes, obviously I am reopening the spa," she was saying to someone on the other line, likely a friend who had blocked her number months ago. "My sister is investing millions. We are partners now. Actually, I am basically running the family office. You should come to the gala, VIP table. Yeah, I can get you in." She twirled in the mirror, admiring herself. She looked happy. It was the happiness of a parasite that had found a fresh host. I sat in my office, watching her twirl on my monitor, sipping cold brew coffee. "Enjoy the dress, Bianca," I whispered. "I hope you kept the receipt." On Friday afternoon, 24 hours before the gala, Marcus walked into my office. He didn't knock. He placed a single, thick document on my desk. "It is done," he said. I looked at the paper. It was the transfer of Leanne and the assignment of mortgage. My shell company, Nemesis Holdings, had successfully purchased the debt from Shadow Capital. I had paid the principal plus a 10% premium. The transaction had cleared 10 minutes ago. Technically, and legally, I was now the owner of the Heartwood estate. "Did they notice?" I asked, running my finger over the seal. "No," Marcus replied. "Shadow Capital doesn't notify the borrower of a transfer of servicing until the next billing cycle. As far as your parents know, they still owe the loan shark. They have no idea the shark has been replaced by something much worse." "Perfect." I picked up a pen and signed the acceptance line. The ink was black and permanent. "Also," Marcus added, "the venue is prepped. The lighting, the sound, the projector. I checked the guest list. It is full. Your father was very efficient. He invited everyone, 200 of Seattle's elite. Bankers, lawyers, socialites, people he owes money to, people who laughed at him. He wants an audience for his resurrection," I said, closing the file. "I am just giving him what he wants, an audience." I turned to my computer. I had one notification pending. It was an Instagram alert. I had unblocked Bianca temporarily just to monitor her public feed. She had posted a story 5 minutes ago. It was a selfie of her holding a glass of champagne likely stolen from the complimentary tray at the bridal shop. She was winking. The caption was written in bold, neon pink font. "The dark days are over. Back to queen status. The Heartwood Empire is rising again. Thank you to my amazing sister for finally realizing who the real star is. Money Moves Sister Act Gala. Ready," I stared at the hashtag Sister Act. I leaned back in my chair and let out a laugh that surprised even me. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was the genuine, terrified amusement of someone watching a person see through the branch they were sitting on. "You are welcome, Bianca," I said to the screen. "You are very, very welcome." I minimized the window and opened the presentation file for tomorrow night. I double-checked the slide deck. Slide 1, the Novus Bio logo. Slide 2, the Heartwood Family Charity Initiative. Slide 3. Slide 3 was a video file. I pressed play to ensure the audio was synced. The voices of my parents, captured by the hidden microphones in my childhood dining room, filled the office. "She is stupid. Just compliment her and she pays." I paused the video. The sound cut off. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The sun was setting over Seattle, painting the city in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. Tomorrow, the city will be talking about the Heartwoods. I would make sure they never forgot us. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel smelled of expensive perfume, fresh lilies, and the distinct metallic scent of desperate ambition. I stood on the mezzanine balcony, looking down at the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns swirling beneath the crystal chandeliers. It was a tableau of Seattle's elite tech moguls, old money inheritors, curious journalists, and, circling the room like sharks in rented finery, my family. The Heartwoods had arrived in the leased Bentley exactly on time, making an entrance that was calculated to turn heads. My father, Richard, was wearing a tuxedo that fit him a little too tightly around the waist, likely an older bespoke piece he refused to retire. My mother, Catherine, was practically vibrating with adrenaline, the borrowed diamond necklace at her throat catching the light with every manic turn of her head. I watched as Richard cornered a group of bankers near the ice sculpture. Even from this distance, I could read his body language. He was puffing out his chest, gesturing expansively toward the stage, and then pointing back at himself. I knew exactly what he was saying. "That is my girl. I raised her. The apple does not fall far from the tree." It was nauseating. I descended the marble staircase, my hand trailing lightly on the banister. I was wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet, severe and unadorned, a stark contrast to the glittering excess of the room. As I reached the floor, the crowd parted for me. I was the woman of the hour. I was the $200 million check they all wanted to cash. "Fiona." My mother's voice cut through the hum of conversation. She rushed over, dragging a bewildered-looking woman in her wake. "Fiona, darling, you remember Mrs. Vanderwall from the club? She was just saying how she always knew you were destined for greatness." Mrs. Vanderwall, a woman who had once asked security to remove me from the club pool because my swimsuit was too department store, offered me a trembling, ingratiating smile. "So lovely to see you, Fiona. Your mother has been telling us all about the new family partnership. It is so inspiring to see a dynasty coming together." "Dynasty," I repeated, the word tasting like rust. "That is certainly one word for it. It is all about genetics," my father boomed. Appearing at my elbow and clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder, he smelled of scotch and mints. "You can't teach that kind of business acumen. It is in the blood." I stepped smoothly out from under his hand. "Actually, Richard, I believe business acumen is learned in the library at 3 a.m. when you have no safety net. But genetics are fascinating, aren't they?" Before he could process the slight, a camera flash blinded us. Bianca had arrived. My sister was wearing the gold sequined dress I had seen on the security feed. In person, it was even louder. It clung to her like a second skin, reflecting every beam of light in the room until she looked like a human disco ball. She was dragging a photographer from a local lifestyle magazine by the arm. "Over here," she directed, striking a pose that involved popping her hip out to a biologically improbable angle. "Get one of the Heartwood sisters, the power duo." She threw her arm around my waist. I stood stiffly, staring straight into the lens with a deadpan expression while she beamed like a pageant queen. "So, Bianca," the reporter asked, scribbling in his notepad, Rumor has it this gala is to announce a major collaboration. Oh, it is huge, Bianca gushed, leaning in as if sharing a state secret. My sister is backing my new fashion line. We are thinking global. Paris, Milan, Seattle. It is going to be the flagship project of the new Heartwood Family Fund. Is that so? The reporter asked, looking at me for confirmation. I smiled. It was a tight, thin smile that didn't reach my eyes. You will have to wait for the speech. I am afraid. We want to save the surprise for the podium. See, Bianca winked at the reporter. She loves drama. We are so alike. The lights in the ballroom dimmed 3 times, signaling the start of the presentation. A hush fell over the crowd as the heavy velvet curtains on the stage parted. It is time, I said to my family. You should take your seats. I reserved the front center table for you, the best view in the house. Break a leg, honey, my mother whispered, clutching my hand with her sweaty palm. Make us proud. I pulled my hand away. I will make this a night you never forget. Catherine. I walked up the stairs to the stage. The spotlight hit me, blindingly white and hot. I took my place behind the acrylic podium. The microphone hummed with potential energy. I looked out at the audience. In the front row, bathed in the glow of the stage lights, sat the Heartwoods. They were beaming. My father had his arm around my mother. Bianca was holding her phone up, live streaming to her 300 followers. They looked like royalty waiting for their coronation. Good evening, I said. My voice was amplified, booming through the hall, commanding absolute silence. Thank you all for coming. I paused, letting the silence stretch. 5 years ago, I began, my tone conversational but heavy. I stood in a room not unlike this one, though much smaller, and made a promise to myself. I promised that I would build something that mattered. I promised that I would not let my circumstances define my future. My parents nodded sagely in the front row. Richard whispered something to Mrs. Vanderwall at the next table, probably claiming he had helped me write the speech. Building Novus Bio was not a solitary act, I continued. No one succeeds in a vacuum. We all need people who believe in us when we have nothing to offer but a dream and a lot of caffeine. I gestured to the side of the stage. I would like to thank Liam, my husband, when I was working out of a garage. Unable to pay rent, he paid the bills, he fed me, he held me when I cried. He was my foundation when the ground was crumbling. The audience applauded politely. Liam, standing in the wings, gave a small, humble wave. I looked back at the crowd. I would like to thank Sarah, my assistant, who has organized my life for 3 years. I would like to thank Professor Henderson, who wrote the recommendation letter that got me my first grant when no one else would look at my application. I went on, listing my lead researcher, my patent lawyer, and even the janitor at my first lab who used to let me sleep on the break room couch. I did not mention Richard. I did not mention Catherine. I did not mention Bianca. The smiles in the front row began to falter. My father shifted in his seat. My mother's hand went to her diamond necklace, twisting the chain nervously. They were waiting for the, but most of all, my family line. It never came. Success, I said, shifting gears, brings with it a responsibility to look back at where you came from and fix what is broken. The relief in the front row was palpable. This was it, the pivot. My family is here tonight, I acknowledged, looking directly at them. Richard straightened his tie, a smug grin returning to his face. Bianca pointed the phone camera at herself, mouthing, "It is happening." And seeing them here reminds me of the importance of financial support, I said. Money can be a weapon, or it can be a shield. For too long, I have seen how the lack of resources can destroy potential. I took a deep breath. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. That is why, I announced, my voice ringing out like a bell. Tonight, I am pledging the first $5 million of my personal fortune. My father half rose from his seat, ready to accept the applause. My mother closed her eyes. Lips moving in silent prayer, Bianca let out a small squeal of excitement. To establish the Fiona Hartwood Scholarship Foundation. I paused for a fraction of a second. The confusion on my father's face was just beginning to form, a small ripple in his arrogance. This foundation, I continued, speaking clearly and deliberately, is dedicated strictly to children who have been abandoned, neglected, or financially exploited by their own families. The silence that followed was not the respectful silence of a speech. It was the shocked, vacuum-sealed silence of a room that had just witnessed a murder. My father froze halfway out of his chair, looking like a gargoyle. My mother's mouth fell open, unhinged. Bianca lowered her phone, the live stream still running, capturing her face as it drained of all color. The mission of this fund, I went on, driving the nail into the coffin, is to ensure that no young person has to suffer the indignity of being treated as a financial instrument by their parents. We will provide full tuition, housing, and legal protection for students who need to sever ties with toxic home environments to survive. I leaned into the microphone, my eyes locking with my father's terrified stare. Because I believe, I said, my voice dropping to a register of pure, cold steel. That family should be a safe harbor, not an anchor that drags you down. And when blood relations fail you, you have to build your own way out. This $5 million is for the survivors. It is for the ones who had to walk down the aisle alone. The applause that followed my announcement was thunderous. It started from the back of the room, where the younger entrepreneurs and the scholarship recipients sat, and it rolled forward like a tidal wave, crashing over the heads of the wealthy elite until even the most cynical bankers were on their feet. The sound was deafening, a physical force that vibrated through the floorboards of the stage. But I was not looking at the standing ovation. I was looking down at the only 3 people in the room who were still seated. The Hartwood table was an island of paralyzed silence in a sea of noise. My mother, Catherine, looked as though she had been slapped across the face with a wet towel. Her mouth hung open, her eyes darting frantically from the stage to the cheering crowd, trying to process the fact that the $5 million she had mentally spent on renovations and jewelry was gone. My father, Richard, had turned a shade of purple that clashed violently with the velvet curtains behind me. He was gripping the edge of the table so hard I thought he might snap the wood in half. And then there was Bianca. The golden child did not handle disappointment well. She had never been told no in her entire life. For 30 years, she had been fed a diet of unearned praise and bailed out of every mistake she made. The concept that the money train had not only left the station but had run her over was simply too much for her fragile ego to comprehend. She stood up so abruptly that her chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the parquet floor with a sound that cut through the applause like a gunshot. The clapping faltered, heads turned, the spotlight, sensing movement, swung instinctively toward the commotion in the front row. "What the hell is this?" Bianca screamed. Her voice was shrill, amplified by the sudden silence of the room. She wasn't looking at me with sisterly confusion. She was looking at me with hatred. She pointed a manicured finger at the stage, her bracelets jangling. "You said you were going to help us. You promised. What about the family fund? What about my fashion line?" My mother reached out, tugging desperately on the hem of Bianca's sequined dress. "Bianca, sit down. Sit down right now." "No." Bianca yanked her skirt away, her face twisted into a snarl. "She lied to us. She brought us here, made us buy these clothes, made us tell everyone we were partners. She scammed us." The murmuring in the hall grew louder. Phones were raised. The press photographers, sensing blood in the water, pushed closer to the velvet ropes, their shutters clicking in a rapid staccato rhythm. I stood perfectly still behind the podium. I did not flinch. I let her scream. I let the audience see the contrast between the composed CEO on stage and the hysterical, entitled brat on the floor. When she finally paused to take a breath, I leaned into the microphone. "A promise?" I asked, my voice calm, echoing through the high-ceilinged ballroom. "I told you I would use my money to help those who deserved it. I told you I would fund a legacy. I never promised to bankroll your laziness, Bianca. And I certainly never promised to fund a fashion line for a woman who has never finished a single project in her life. My father shot to his feet. The humiliation had finally pierced his thick hide, overriding his sense of self-preservation. He looked around at the faces of his peers, the bankers, the club members, and saw their pity and their amusement. It broke him. "You ungrateful little witch," Richard roared, his voice shaking with rage. "How dare you, after everything we did for you? We raised you. We put a roof over your head. Is this how you repay us, by dragging us here to make us a laughingstock?" "You didn't raise me, Richard," I replied, dropping the formality of dad entirely. "You tolerated me. And as for the roof over my head, I believe I just bought that roof yesterday." "You are a liar," he shouted, stepping over the fallen chair to advance toward the stage. "You tricked us. You played the loving daughter just to get us here so you could humiliate us. You are sick. You manipulated us." "Manipulated you?" I asked. I smiled, but there was zero humor in it. "That is an interesting choice of words coming from you. You think I am the one who has been pretending." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a small black remote control. "I expected you might say that," I said. So I prepared a little rebuttal. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you would direct your attention to the main screen." I pressed the button. The massive projection screen behind me, which had been displaying the logo of my new charity, flickered. The image changed. It was no longer a polished graphic. It was a grainy, high-contrast, black-and-white video feed. The audience gasped. It was clearly security footage. The timestamp in the corner read Sunday, October 12th, 7:42 p.m. It was the dining room of the Hartwood estate. The audio was crystal clear. I had hired the best technicians in the business to ensure that every syllable was captured. On the screen, my parents and sister were sitting around the table. Moments after I had left the dinner, they were celebrating. Richard was pouring more wine. "God, that was easier than I thought," the digital version of Richard said, laughing as he toasted the air. "She is so desperate for approval. It is pathetic. Really, a few compliments about her suit, a hug at the door, and she melted." "She is stupid," Bianca's voice rang out from the speakers, dripping with disdain. On screen, she was checking her makeup in her phone reflection. "She actually thinks we care about her little science projects. I just need $5 million. Once the check clears, I am moving to a penthouse downtown. I am not staying in this dump with you two. We just have to keep up the act until the gala," Catherine's voice said, soothingly. "Just smile. Tell her she is the pride of the family. Once the money is in the account, we can go back to how things were. We won't have to deal with her anymore. She is so dreary. No wonder her husband is the only one who can stand her." "Cash cow," Richard sneered on the screen, taking a swig of wine. "That is all she is. We milk her, we pay the debts, and then we are done." The video froze on Richard's sneering face. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a collective breath is held. 200 people had just heard the raw, unfiltered toxicity of the Hartwood family. I looked down at them. Richard had turned pale, the color draining from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Catherine had covered her mouth with both hands, trembling violently. Bianca was staring at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Cash cow," I repeated into the microphone. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. "That is what you called me. That is what you think family is, a transaction." I looked at the press pit. The photographers were no longer hesitating. Flashbulbs erupted like a strobe light show, capturing the horror and the guilt etched onto my family's faces. This was not just a scandal. It was a social autopsy. "Get that off the screen," Richard screamed. But his voice lacked power now. It was thin and desperate. "That is private. You cannot show that." "I can do whatever I want," I said. "It is my party. And frankly, Richard, you are ruining the vibe." I raised my hand and signaled to the back of the room. "Security?" 4 large men in black suits, who had been waiting in the shadows near the exit, stepped forward. They moved with the silent efficiency of predators. They didn't walk. They glided toward table 1. "Please escort the Hartwood family out," I commanded. "They are trespassing." "You can't do this," Bianca shrieked as a security guard placed a firm hand on her elbow. She tried to pull away, her sequins scraping against his jacket. "I am Fiona Hartwood's sister. I am a VIP." "You are a stranger," I corrected her. "And you are making a scene." The guard lifted Bianca effortlessly, guiding her toward the exit despite her thrashing. Richard tried to puff out his chest and intimidate the guard reaching for him, but the man simply stepped into Richard's personal space and whispered something that made my father deflate instantly. Catherine didn't fight. She was sobbing. A broken, humiliating sound that was picked up by every microphone in the room. The crowd parted to let them through. No one made eye contact with them. People pulled their expensive dresses and tuxedos back, as if fearing that the failure and disgrace of the Hartwoods might be contagious, as they were dragged toward the double doors. Richard turned back one last time. His eyes met mine across the expanse of the ballroom. There was no anger left in them, only a terrified realization that he had underestimated the daughter he had thrown away. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I watched them until the heavy doors swung shut behind them, sealing them out of my world, out of high society, and out of my life. I turned back to the audience. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the rush of adrenaline that comes after surviving a crash. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, my voice steady. "Now, if you look under your seats, you will find information on how to donate to the scholarship fund. Let's make sure no other child has to buy their own family's love." The applause started again, slower this time, but deeper. It wasn't polite applause. It was the sound of respect. Sunday morning in Seattle broke with a leaden, gray sky that promised rain but delivered only a bone-chilling dampness. It was the kind of weather that seeped into the marrow, perfect for the business I had to conduct. My phone had been silent all morning, thanks to the do not disturb mode I had engaged immediately after leaving the gala. When I finally enabled notifications at 8 o'clock, the device nearly vibrated off my nightstand. There were dozens of missed calls from unknown numbers, undoubtedly reporters, and a string of voicemails from Richard Hartwood. I did not listen to them. I did not need to hear his incoherent rage to know what he was saying. I knew the script better than he did. Instead, I drank my black coffee and watched the news. The headlines were exactly as I had orchestrated. Hartwood family scandal. The gala that ended a dynasty. Biotech queen exposes toxic roots. The public humiliation was complete, but humiliation is fleeting. Legal destitution is permanent. At 9 o'clock sharp, the process server I had hired, a man named Mr. Henderson, who looked more like a linebacker than a courier, texted me 2 words: "Service completed." 30 seconds later, my phone rang. It was Richard. I picked up on the first ring. "You are insane!" Richard's voice was a ragged scream, shredding his vocal cords. "We just got served with an eviction notice. A notice to quit. What is this? The bank gave us a forbearance agreement. We have 3 more months." "Good morning, Richard," I said, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with his hysteria. "You are operating on outdated information. The bank no longer holds your mortgage." "What?" he spluttered. "What are you talking about?" "Banks are in the business of mitigating risk," I explained, leaning back in my kitchen chair. "Your loan was classified as a distressed asset, non-performing, toxic. So when a private holding company approached them on Thursday with a cash offer to purchase the debt at face value, they sold it immediately. They were happy to wash their hands of you." "Who?" Richard demanded. "Who bought it?" "I did," I said. The silence on the other end was absolute. "I own the note, Richard," I continued, precise and cold. "I own the primary mortgage. I own the secondary lien from Shadow Capital. And since you are 90 days behind on payments, I have exercised the acceleration clause in your contract. The full balance is due immediately. Since you do not have $1.2 million, I am foreclosing. You have until noon to vacate the premises. You can't do this, he shrieked. Squatters' rights. Eviction takes months. We will fight you in court. I will get a lawyer. I was hoping you would say that, I said. I will be there in 30 minutes. Have your lawyer ready. I hung up. I took the McLaren P1. It felt appropriate to arrive in the machine that represented everything they coveted and could not touch. The drive to the estate was smooth. When I pulled into the driveway, the scene was chaotic. A rusty moving truck, clearly hired at the last minute, was parked haphazardly on the lawn, crushing what little remained of the rose bushes. Mr. Henderson was standing by the front door, arms crossed, ensuring no property was damaged property that now legally belonged to me. Richard and Catherine came storming out of the house as soon as I exited the car. They looked haggard. Catherine's eyes were swollen shut from crying, and Richard was wearing the same clothes he had worn to the gala, stained with wine and sweat. You have no heart, Catherine wailed, pointing a shaking finger at me. How can you do this to your own mother, kick us out on the street? It is a simple property dispute, I said, walking past them toward the porch. You stopped paying for the house. You lose the house. That is how the world works. We will sue you, Richard shouted, following me. We will drag this out for years. You think you can just throw us out in 2 hours? No judge will sign off on this. I stopped. I turned around and opened the sleek leather briefcase I had brought with me. You are right, Richard, I agreed. Eviction is a tedious legal process. It usually takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months to forcibly remove a tenant, and I am a busy woman. I do not have time for court dates. I pulled out a single document, preserved in a plastic sleeve. It was a loan application from 10 years ago. So, I said, holding the paper up to the gray light, I am going to give you a choice. Option A. You stay. We go to court, and while we are there, I hand this document over to the district attorney. Richard squinted at the paper. Then his face went white. It was the color of old ash. You recognize this, don't you? I asked softly. $75,000 auto loan. Santander Consumer USA. Primary applicant Fiona Hartwood. Date of birth verified. Social security number verified. Signature. I tapped the shaky, looped scrawl at the bottom. Forged, Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Identity theft is a federal crime, I stated, reciting the statutes I had memorized the night before. Fraud in excess of $50,000 carries a mandatory minimum sentence. Since you both conspired to do this, Richard co-signing, Catherine driving the car, you are both liable. I have the forensic handwriting analysis ready. It matches Catherine's signature on your tax returns perfectly. Fiona, please, Catherine whimpered, her legs giving out. She slumped against the porch railing. We didn't think it would hurt you. You were young. You didn't need credit then. I was 18, I snapped. And because of this, I lived in a basement with mold for 2 years because no landlord would trust me. But that is emotional. This is legal. Here is the deal. I pulled out a second document. It was a voluntary surrender of property agreement. Option B, I said, holding out a pen. You sign this. You agree to vacate the property immediately. You waive all rights to future claims. In exchange, I shared this loan application. I do not call the police. I do not send my parents to federal prison for fraud. I looked at Richard. Jail or the street? Richard, pick one. He looked at the house. He looked at me. He looked at the looming threat of prison time. He was a coward, and cowards always choose self-preservation. He snatched the pen from my hand. His hand shook violently as he scribbled his signature on the surrender agreement. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. Pack your things, I ordered. You have the truck. Take what you can carry. Everything else stays. Bianca appeared in the doorway then. She was dragging a Louis Vuitton suitcase that looked suspiciously empty. She wasn't angry anymore. She looked small, frightened, and pathetic. Fiona, she sniffled, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Please, where am I supposed to go? I can't live in a motel. I am your sister. Doesn't that mean anything? She reached out, trying to grab my hand. We used to play with dolls together. Remember, I am sorry about the spa. I am sorry about everything. Just help me. Give me a deposit for an apartment. Anything. I looked at her hand, the hand that had never lifted a finger to help me, only to take from me. I stepped back. Sister, I said, testing the word. Biologically, yes, but legally. You are a stranger who is trespassing on my property. I pointed a manicured finger toward the driveway, where my McLaren P1 sat gleaming like a jewel against the drab landscape. You see that car? Bianca? I asked. She nodded, wiping her nose. You like luxury, I said. You like expensive things. Do you want that lifestyle? Then do what I did. Get a job. But I don't know how to do anything, she wailed. I hear the Burger King on 4th Avenue is hiring, I said coldly. They pay $15 an hour. If you save every penny, you might be able to afford a hubcap on that car in about 5 years. I suggest you start walking. The bus stop is a mile that way. She stared at me, her mouth agape, realizing finally that there was no safety net. The Bank of Fiona was closed forever. For the next hour, I stood on the porch and watched. I watched my father struggle to lift heavy boxes of his own clothes into the rusty truck because he couldn't afford movers. I watched my mother wrap her few remaining valuables in a newspaper. I watched Bianca shove her designer clothes into garbage bags because her suitcases were too heavy to carry. I felt nothing. I checked my pulse. It was steady. I expected to feel sadness, or perhaps a lingering sense of guilt, but there was only a vast, clean emptiness. It was the feeling of a surgeon who had just successfully excised a malignant tumor that had been killing the patient for decades. At noon, the truck engine sputtered to life. It coughed out a cloud of black smoke that hung in the damp air. Richard drove. Catherine sat in the middle. Bianca sat against the window, pressing her face against the glass, looking back at the house she would never enter again. I didn't wave. I watched the truck rumble down the long driveway, turn left onto the main road, and disappear behind the line of overgrown pine trees. They were gone. I turned around and looked at the house. It was just wood and stone. It wasn't a home. It never had been. I took the keys out of my pocket, the keys Richard had surrendered to me. I locked the front door. I walked back to my McLaren. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The roar of the motor drowned out the silence of the abandoned estate. I put the car in gear and drove away, leaving the rot behind me, driving toward a future that belonged only to me. The hammering sound that echoed across the lawn of the estate was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was the sound of deconstruction and rebirth. I stood on the sidewalk, watching a team of contractors hoist a massive slab of brushed steel onto the stone pillars where the rusty iron gates used to hang. The old sign, which had simply read Heartwood Manor in pretentious, peeling gold script, was gone. It had been thrown into a dumpster 3 days ago. In its place, the new steel plaque caught the morning sun. It read, The Fiona Hartwood Scholarship Foundation, Headquarters, an incubator for the forgotten. I did not sell the house. Selling it would have just been a transaction. Keeping it and transforming it into a sanctuary for children who had been discarded by their own families just as I had been, was a statement. It was a poetic reclamation of space. The dining room where my family had plotted to exploit me was now a computer lab. The living room where Bianca had lazily scrolled through Instagram was now a library filled with textbooks. I adjusted my sunglasses and turned away. My work there was done, across town, in a zip code that the old Hartwoods would have sneered at. A very different reality was unfolding. My private investigator, who I kept on retainer just to ensure they didn't try to countersue, had sent me the latest update that morning. Richard, Catherine, and Bianca were currently squeezed into a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex near the industrial district, right next to the airport. The walls were thin, the carpet was stained, and the noise of cargo planes taking off shook the windows every 15 minutes. But the real tragedy or comedy, depending on your perspective, was Bianca. the golden child, had finally entered the workforce. She had secured a position at a diner, not as a manager, but as a server. The local tabloids, vicious as ever, had practically camped out there for the first week. One headline, accompanied by a grainy photo of Bianca in a polyester uniform wiping down a sticky table, read, "From Gucci to Greece, the fallen princess of Seattle." She was reportedly terrible at the job. She complained about her feet, she got orders wrong, and she rolled her eyes at customers who didn't tip 20%. But she stayed. She had to. The alternative was starvation. My parents had tried to fight back. Of course, desperation breeds audacity. A week after the eviction, Richard had contacted a local news station. He gave an exclusive interview, sitting next to a weeping Catherine, claiming that I was a monster who had abandoned her elderly, frail parents in their time of need. He spun a tale of financial woe caused by market forces and painted me as a cold-hearted tyrant who had forgotten her roots. For about 6 hours, social media was divided. People loved to hate a rich woman, but I was ready. Before the morning news cycle had even finished, I instructed my PR team to release the Heartwood dossier. It was a comprehensive digital file that I posted directly to my social media channels. It contained no commentary, just cold, hard data. I published the redacted bank statements showing the unauthorized loan they took out in my name when I was 18. I published the invoices for Bianca's $2 million spa renovations side by side with my student loan applications from the same year, which they had refused to co-sign. I published the transcript of the security footage from the gala, where they called me a cash cow. The court of public opinion did not just turn, it stampeded. By noon, my parents were pariahs. The internet tore them apart with a ferocity that made my revenge look gentle. They were doxxed, ridiculed, and shunned. Richard lost his membership at the few remaining clubs that had tolerated him. Catherine could not show her face at the grocery store without being sneered at. They retreated into their cramped apartment, silencing their phones, living in the shadow of the truth I had illuminated. I arrived back at the Novus Bio Tower just as the sun was hitting its peak. The office was humming with activity, a hive of innovation and progress. I walked past the reception desk, nodding to the staff, feeling a lightness in my step that defied gravity. Liam was waiting for me in my office. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city, holding 2 mugs of tea. He turned as I entered. He didn't smile immediately. He studied my face, looking for cracks, looking for the lingering pain of a daughter who had just orphaned herself. "You went to the house," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did," I replied, taking the mug from his hand. The ceramic was warm against my skin. "The sign is up. The first cohort of scholars moves in next month. We have 12 students selected. All of them are brilliant. All of them are estranged from their parents." Liam nodded. "And how do you feel?" "Heavy sad." I walked to the window and stood next to him. We looked down at the streets of Seattle, the cars moving in rhythmic patterns, the life of the city pulsing below us. Somewhere out there, in the gray sprawl of the suburbs, my parents were likely arguing over whose turn it was to wash the dishes. I searched my heart for a pang of regret. I looked for the little girl who used to cry in her pillow, wishing her mother would hug her. She wasn't there anymore. She had grown up. "I don't feel heavy," I said softly. "I feel light. For 32 years, I have been carrying around this invisible backpack of their expectations and their failures. I thought if I just ran fast enough or made enough money, I could outrun the weight. But I didn't need to run. I just needed to drop it." I turned to look at Liam, my husband, my partner, the man who had held my hand when the chairs were empty. "They used to define me," I said. "Every success I had was to prove them wrong. Every failure I feared was because I didn't want to be them. But now they are just a footnote, a cautionary tale." Liam wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. "So, what are we celebrating today? The end of the past?" "No." I smiled, and this time it reached my eyes, bright and unburdened. "We are celebrating the beginning." I looked back at the skyline one last time. I feel like I just truly married my own life, I said, the realization settling over me like a warm blanket. They didn't come to the wedding 5 years ago, so they don't get invited to the future. The guest list is closed. I walked over to my desk. On top of the pile of paperwork sat a single file. It was the application for the very first recipient of the Fiona Hartwood Scholarship. I opened it. Attached was a photo of a young girl, 18 years old, with determined eyes and a jaw set in defiance. Her essay described how her parents had stolen her college fund to buy a vacation home, and how she was working 3 jobs to become a biologist. She was me, but she wouldn't have to suffer like me. I picked up my pen, the same pen I had used to sign the eviction notice, but this time, the ink wouldn't be used to destroy it. It would be used to build. I signed my name on the approval line, Fiona Hartwood, CEO. I capped the pen and laid it down. The silence in the office wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was the sound of freedom. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on how I handled my family. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Veronica Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and press the hype button to help this video reach more people who need to hear that it is okay to choose yourself.